Welcome back to our continuing and ongoing study of the Gospel of Matthew. We find ourselves in Matthew chapter 26, and I'm looking at verse 6 here. And I will be reading this verse out of the New Revised Standard Bible. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 6. Now, while Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, here is a verse casually thrown out by Matthew that we could just kind of zip by and move on. The illusion, of course, is that we know lots about the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazarene. The reality is there's much that we do not know. And in point of fact, when you really look at things, we really do not know very much at all about Jesus. So, it's long been seen and pointed out that Jesus was about 30 when he began his ministry. Well, what is told between his birth, you think of the Christmas stories, we know a number of texts there, an incident at age 12, and then there's this gap between age 12 and when he starts his ministry, and according to Luke, about age 30. So that's like 18 years with nothing. And so we can think we know a lot about Jesus, and the reality is we don't. It is not that we lack the needed information to make an informed decision on who he was and what he was about. It is rather the curiosity factor, where there are times we know that there's more than what is said. Look at this verse. The thing that jumps out to us is that Simon was a leper. Now, it seems reasonable, since there are a number of people in his home, he was no longer a leper. The reason for saying this is that association with a leper made one unclean. You see, you have two choices. Either he was cleansed from his leprosy. Now, of course, we make that standard clarification here, that in the ancient world, they did not have the precision that we would have with diseases. Whether he actually suffered from leprosy per se, or a bad case of emphysema, psoriasis, or some other form of skin disease, or something else, is beside the point. He would have been considered under the religious laws of the day as a person unclean. If you are unclean, it makes it difficult to partake in worship, and this was Passover week. If we assume that he was unclean, it's hard to see how he could have people in his home. If we assume that he has been cleansed, which is what I feel we have to do, the question is by whom and when did he get cleansed? My curiosity, as it were, is being raised. In other words, I can begin to have all sorts of questions about this passage through this one verse, because obviously there's a lot going on behind the story, behind the scenes, which is just assumed by Matthew, which we have no access. You see, there seems to be a story here that is not recorded in the Gospels. In other words, it seems that Simon and Jesus had crossed paths before. Why do I say that? Well, first off, Simon has Jesus in his home. Obviously, it seems to me that they must have some social connection for this to be the case. Is it to be assumed that Simon was a man who experienced the healing touch of Jesus? That is very tantalizing and seems very probable, but again, not conclusive. Yes, I would tend to, on balance, say he had been touched by Jesus. Remember that to be cleansed of leprosy was not just a healing. Sometimes we look at what Jesus does and go, oh, Jesus healed this person, or Jesus healed that person. But understand, what Jesus often did was not so much provide healing. Think of the woman with the discharge of blood. Think of Simon the leper here. What Jesus provided was for the opportunity for these people to partake in and enter into, again, mainstream life. Not just religious life, mainstream life. That these people, by their afflictions, which we could medically diagnose and go, oh, this person had this or that, which begs the question, because it wasn't primarily a medical issue, it was a social and cultural issue where their uncleanness caused them to be separated from the larger community and thus from social connections. And the broadest sense of the idea to be healed of leprosy was to be given one's life back. And maybe we should look at it more like that, as to have one's life restored. If this is true, then this was a person, Simon, who had a great debt that he owed to Jesus. There is much that we do not know about Jesus and his ministry. There is much we will never know. Now, the fact that there is a lot that we do not know about Jesus provides a space for conspiracy theories to work. What I'm saying to you is, because we actually know so very little, it provides a lot of room for those people who want to spin the latest of conspiracy theories. You know, the people who say that the Dead Sea Scrolls will finally allow us to know who Jesus really was. The people who say that the Gospel of Thomas and other works that were, well, by nefarious plans of the church, swept aside and buried and forgotten about, well, we can now go to them and find out who the real Jesus is. The people who say that sometime in the future that the latest archaeological find will revolutionize our understanding of who Jesus is. Yes, there is more that we can know of Jesus. And yes, I would love to know more about what he did. But we have to understand that is not the same thing as saying that which we find will revolutionize our understanding of Jesus, who Jesus is. The reality is that none of this will change who Jesus is. We already have what we need to make an informed decision to come and follow Jesus as our Lord and Master, the one who provides through his death, atonement, and through his resurrection, find new life and the promise of the life to come.